"Can you protect me, human?" asked the alien princess. She had no idea what that meant. The bullet hit the wall 3 inches from Corporal Ethan Cole's ear, and he did not flinch. He had learned a long time ago that flinching got people killed. In the 7 years he had spent in the United States Marine Corps, across 4 deployments and 2 wars that history books would one day argue about the names of, he had come to understand that the body's first instinct in a firefight was almost always wrong. You did not duck away from sound. You moved toward cover. You moved with purpose. You breathed. He breathed now. The corridor of the Velthari diplomatic vessel was long, curved slightly inward like the inside of a seashell, and lit by that pale blue-green glow that alien engineering seemed to favor. The floors were some kind of composite material that absorbed sound, which was the only reason Ethan had heard the attackers before he saw them. 3 of them, moving fast, wearing dark suits of armor that looked nothing like the Velthari he had been briefed on. These were not diplomats. They were not security. They were something else entirely, and whatever they wanted it badly enough to shoot at a United States Marine inside an interstellar vessel, hovering in a classified orbit above the Pacific Ocean. Ethan pressed his back against the curved wall, checked the magazine in his sidearm, standard issue, 12 rounds remaining, and listened. Behind him, barely breathing, was the reason this had all started. Her name was Sail, and she was the 3rd daughter of the Velthari High Sovereign. She was also, by any reasonable measure, terrified. She stood approximately 5.5 feet tall, which was shorter than Ethan had expected from the species briefings. Her skin was a pale silver gray, with faint bioluminescent lines running along her jaw and collarbone that pulsed softly when she was stressed. Right now they were pulsing fast. Her eyes were large, entirely violet, with no visible whites, and they were fixed on Ethan with an expression that he recognized from faces he had seen in far worse places than this. The expression of someone who had just realized how serious things had become. She had come aboard the Earth vessel 2 days ago for what her handlers described as a cultural exchange. Ethan had been assigned to her personal security detail as a gesture of goodwill from the Joint Commission. He was supposed to be ornamental. He was supposed to stand near doors and look serious while diplomats talked about trade agreements. Nobody had told him about the assassins. Another shot sparked against the wall ahead of him. Different angle, they were spreading out. "Ethan Cole," Sail whispered. Her translator implant handled his language with a faint harmonic underneath each word, like a second voice speaking just below hearing. "I need to ask you something." "Now," he said. "Yes," she said, "now." He glanced back at her. She was watching him with those enormous violet eyes, and despite everything, despite the bullets and the strange corridor and the fact that he was the only armed human being within about 400 miles in any direction, she looked like she was asking a genuine question. "Ask," he said. "Can you protect me, human?" He looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he looked back down the corridor, assessed the spacing of the cover, counted the angles, measured the distance to the emergency hatch he had memorized on his first walkthrough of the ship 2 days ago because he always memorized exits. That was just something Ethan Cole did, and he felt something settle into place in his chest. The same thing that always settled into place. Calm, purpose, clarity. "Yes," he said. She had no idea what that meant. He moved before she could respond, pushing off the wall in a low sprint, drawing fire from the first attacker while simultaneously calculating that the second was positioned behind a structural pillar 9 meters ahead on the left. He went right instead, used the curve of the corridor, put himself at an angle the second attacker had not accounted for, and fired twice. One of the shots connected. The attacker went down. By the time the third attacker adjusted his position, Ethan had already closed the distance. It was over in 11 seconds. He came back to where Sail was standing with her back pressed flat against the wall, her bioluminescent lines blazing bright silver. She stared at the corridor in front of her. Then she looked at him. "You are not what I expected," she said. Nobody ever is, Ethan said and reloaded. The full story of what happened next would not be classified for another 14 months. When the Joint Commission finally agreed that the public could handle knowing that an alien princess had nearly been assassinated aboard a diplomatic vessel in low Earth orbit, and that the incident had been prevented by a single Marine corporal from Riverside, California, who had memorized every exit on the ship out of habit. But the part of the story that the official reports would never fully capture was the 48 hours that followed the shooting. Because the emergency hatch Ethan had found on his walkthrough did not lead where he expected. It led deeper into the ship. Velthari vessels were not built the way human engineers drew things on paper. There was no clear floor plan, no grid, no numbered sections. The ship was organic in its layout, grown rather than constructed, and the deeper chambers were not part of any briefing Ethan had received. When the hatch sealed behind them and the ambient lighting shifted from blue-green to something closer to amber, he understood immediately that they had crossed into a part of the ship that was not meant for guests. Sale knew where they were. He could tell from the way she slowed down, from the way her posture changed, from the faint sound she made that his translator rendered as something between reverence and discomfort. "These are the inner chambers," she said. "Navigation, memory storage, the ship's cognition systems." "We're inside the ship's brain?" Ethan asked. "Approximately," she said. He processed that. "Can the ship seal off the section we came from? The attackers, do they know about this hatch?" Sale tilted her head slightly, and the bioluminescent lines along her jaw flickered. "I can ask it too." "Then ask it." She pressed one hand flat against the wall. The amber light pulsed once, slowly, like a breath. Then the hatch behind them sealed with a sound that Ethan felt more than heard, a low resonance that traveled up through the floor and into his boots. "Done," Sale said. He exhaled. The immediate threat was contained, but contained was not solved. Somewhere on this ship, there were at least 3 more of whoever those attackers had been. The pre-mission briefing had noted that the unauthorized vessel had docked with 5 life signs. He had taken out 2. The other 3 were still moving somewhere in the outer corridors, and they would find another way. They always found another way. "Tell me about them," Ethan said. Sale was quiet for a moment. She moved deeper into the corridor, trailing one hand along the wall as if reading something, and the amber light followed her fingers like a curious animal. "They are called the Vethsorn," she said. "They are, the closest translation your language offers is faction, a political faction but one that uses violence. They have opposed the diplomatic agreement between our people and yours for 3 years. They believe that contact with humanity is a mistake." "Why?" She paused, turned to look at him. There was something complicated in her expression. "Because of exactly this," she said, gesturing toward the corridor where the 2 attackers now lay. "They say that humans are unpredictable, dangerous, that you cannot be trusted because you act in ways that no model can anticipate." She paused again. "When I asked if you could protect me, I was asking in the Velthari sense. I expected you to assess the threat and advise a retreat, to call for backup, to place yourself between me and the corridor and hold position." Her bioluminescent lines pulsed softly. "You did not do any of those things." "No," Ethan agreed. "You attacked." "The corridor was going to collapse as a defensive position in about 30 seconds, he said. "Moving was the right call." "You calculated all of that." "Not calculated," he said. "Felt it, trained it. You train long enough, you stop calculating and start knowing." She looked at him for a long moment. The amber light made her silver skin look almost warm. "The Vethsorn are not entirely wrong," she said quietly. "You are unlike anything we have encountered." Ethan checked his sidearm, confirmed the safety position, and scanned the corridor ahead. "I'll take that as a compliment." The ship's cognition system made a soft sound around them, not quite a word, but not quite not a word either. Sale listened to it, and the bioluminescent lines along her collarbone brightened briefly. The ship says the 3 remaining Vethsorn have broken into the engineering corridor, she said. They are moving toward the reactor interface. Ethan understood what that meant without needing the ship to explain it. A reactor interface was a leverage point. If you could not get to your target, you made your target come to you. They're going to threaten the ship, he said. Yes. To flush us out. Yes. He thought for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Can this ship do anything surprising?" Sale blinked. The violet of her eyes caught the amber light. Surprising. Unexpected. Something the Vethsorn would not have planned for. She was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression, subtle, but he was watching closely enough to catch it. Something that might have been on a human face, the very beginning of an idea. "The ship can fold," she said. "Fold," Ethan repeated. A micro-translation, not interstellar, small, 20 meters, perhaps 30. It uses the cognition system directly, which is why it is never done in orbit. The gravitational interaction is unpredictable. How unpredictable? Very. Ethan looked at the wall. The amber light pulsed back at him, patient as water. "Can it fold them," he said, "and not us?" Sale stared at him. Then slowly, her bioluminescent lines began to glow very bright. The fold happened at 3:47 local time aboard the vessel, which corresponded to approximately 2 in the morning over the Pacific below. From the outside, the ship did nothing visible. No flash of light, no displacement wave, no dramatic effect for the sensor arrays on the 2 observation satellites that were tracking it. Internal records would later show a brief power fluctuation, a spike in the cognition system's processing load, and a micro-distortion in the gravity regulation matrix that lasted 0.4 seconds. From the inside, from where Ethan Cole was standing in the amber-lit inner corridor with his back against the wall, and Sale's hand pressed flat to the surface beside him, it felt like the air forgot itself for half a breath. Like the floor briefly reconsidered its relationship with gravity. Like something vast and casual had reached through the fabric of local space and rearranged 3 things that had been in one place and put them somewhere else. The 3 Vethsorn soldiers who had been moving through the engineering corridor found themselves, without transition, standing in the docking bay. Not near the reactor interface. Not near any leverage point. In the open, exposed, under the full surveillance of the ship's internal monitoring, with exactly no cover and no avenue of approach to anywhere that mattered. The ship sealed the docking bay. It took 17 minutes for the Velthari security response team to arrive from the secondary vessel that had been holding position 6 kilometers out. Ethan spent those 17 minutes standing in the corridor with his sidearm in his hand, listening. The ship made its quiet sounds around him. Sale sat with her back against the wall a few feet away, and after the first 5 minutes, she stopped watching the corridor and started watching him instead. "You are not afraid," she said. It was not entirely a question. "I'm afraid," Ethan said. "I'm just not busy with it right now." She processed that. The bioluminescent lines along her jaw pulsed slowly, thoughtfully. In Velthari, there is no concept for that distinction. Fear and the presence of fear are the same thing. If you are afraid, you are afraid. It changes what you do. "For humans too, sometimes," Ethan said. "The training is about making sure it changes what you do in the right direction." "And what is the right direction?" "Toward the problem," he said. "Always toward the problem." Silence settled between them. It was the comfortable kind which surprised him a little. He had shared silences with other soldiers in similar situations, in dark corners of buildings in places that had no good names, waiting for the next thing to happen. Those silences had weight, shared understanding, the specific texture of people who knew what the stakes were. This silence felt similar, which surprised him because Sale was very far from being a soldier. "My father's advisors told me the security detail was ceremonial," Sale said eventually. "That's what they told me too," Ethan said. "They were wrong." "People often are," he said. About humans. She looked at him. The violet eyes were steady, and something in them had changed from the beginning of this night. The terror was not gone. It would not be gone for a while, he suspected, from the way trauma moved through a person, but it had been joined by something else. Attention. Focus. The particular sharpening of someone who has seen something they did not expect and is working out what it means. The Vethsorn believe humans are dangerous, she said. We are, Ethan said simply. They believe it is a reason to avoid contact. That depends on which direction the danger is pointed, he said. He glanced at her briefly. Tonight it was pointed at the people trying to kill you. She was quiet for a long moment. Yes, she said, it was. The security team arrived 6 minutes later. 8 Velthari soldiers in full armor, moving in precise formation, filling the corridor with the efficient violence of people who were very good at their jobs. They swept the inner chambers, confirmed the situation in the docking bay, extracted sail with professional efficiency, and regarded Ethan with expressions that his limited knowledge of Velthari facial anatomy could not fully interpret. Their commander, a tall male whose bioluminescent markings ran in broad stripes across his shoulders, looked at the 2 bodies in the outer corridor. Then he looked at Ethan. He said something to Sail that the translator did not catch, either too fast or intentionally spoken below its pickup threshold. Sail replied. Her voice was calm. Her bioluminescent lines had settled into a steady, even glow. The commander looked at Ethan again. Then he made a gesture that Ethan did not recognize, but which the other soldiers around him answered by standing slightly straighter. He says, Sail told Ethan quietly, that he did not expect the human to be effective. What did you say back? Ethan asked. The faintest curve appeared at the corner of her mouth, the first time he had seen anything like a smile on her face. I told him that was the point, she said. The formal inquiry lasted 11 days. Ethan spent most of it sitting in a chair in a glass-walled room aboard the Joint Commission's hub station, answering questions from people who had very strong feelings about the chain of command, and the proper protocols for a diplomatic security detail, and the specific legal status of a United States Marine who had discharged a firearm aboard a foreign vessel in orbit. He answered all the questions honestly. He had not been given the authority to do what he did. He had done it anyway. He did not particularly regret it. His commanding officer, Colonel Diane Holt, sat through 3 of those sessions without saying a word, and then on the 4th day she walked him out to the observation deck while the inquiry took a recess, and they stood together looking at the Pacific below, 17,000 feet of nothing between them and the water, and she said, You know this is going to be a mess. Yes, ma'am, Ethan said. The commission is going to argue about this for months. Yes, ma'am. You jumped the chain. You acted without clearance. You discharged a weapon in an extraterrestrial sovereign space, and you used their own ship's cognition system against enemy combatants in a way that has no legal precedent anywhere in 2 species worth of law. That's accurate, ma'am. Colonel Holt looked at him. She was a compact woman, mid-50s, with the kind of stillness that came from having made decisions in bad situations so many times that bad situations had simply stopped being personal. She had deployed 4 times before taking the commission assignment, and Ethan had served under her for 2 of those deployments. He trusted her judgment more than almost anyone alive. The Velthari diplomatic office sent a communication this morning, she said. Ethan waited. They are requesting, she said, that you be assigned to Sail's permanent security detail for the duration of the exchange program. He looked at her. Apparently, Colonel Holt continued, with an expression that was trying very hard not to be amused, the princess herself submitted the request, in writing, with a formal endorsement from the ship's cognition system, which is apparently capable of endorsing things when it decides it like someone. Ethan thought about the amber light following Sail's fingers along the wall, the soft sound the ship had made, the one that was almost a word. Huh, he said. The request uses a Velthari legal designation, she said. The translator is having some trouble with it. The closest equivalent we have found so far is something like bound protector or chosen guardian. It has implications in their law about responsibility and standing, and several other things the Commission's legal team is still untangling. She looked at him steadily. Before I tell you what the Commission decided, I want to know what you think. Ethan turned back to the window. Below them, the Pacific moved in slow, enormous patterns that were visible from this height in a way they never were from the ground. Light played across the surface in long streaks. Somewhere down there was Riverside, his mother's house, a backyard with a concrete patio and a lemon tree that had never produced as many lemons as anyone wanted. He thought about Sale standing with her back against the wall, asking him a question in the middle of a firefight. The quiet seriousness of it, the genuine wanting to know. He thought about what he had said. Yes. And he thought about her face when she realized he had meant it in a way she had never encountered before in her life. I think, Ethan said slowly, that whatever the Veth Sorn believe about humans being dangerous and unpredictable, they're not wrong. We are. The question they got wrong is what that means. He paused. They think it means we can't be trusted. It actually means we are very hard to stop when we decide something matters. Colonel Holt was quiet for a moment. And does it matter, she asked, the assignment? He thought about the amber light. He thought about 11 seconds in a corridor and a fold in space, and a princess sitting against a wall asking him why he wasn't afraid. Yes, ma'am, he said, I think it does. She nodded once, as if she had expected exactly that answer. Then you should know, she said, that the Commission approved the request this morning. Pending your agreement, she paused. They are calling it a historic precedent, the first formal guardian assignment between our species. Ethan nodded slowly. There's one more thing, she said. Ma'am. The translation team worked through the night on that designation, she said. The legal term Sale used. She pulled out a small data sheet and looked at it. They finally found the closest equivalent in our historical records. In old usage in several cultures, there was a concept for a person bound by choice to the protection of another, not by order, not by duty to a chain of command, by decision. She handed him the sheet. He read the word at the top. Champion. He folded the sheet carefully and put it in his breast pocket. When do I start? He asked. The Velthari homeworld was called Vel Sara, which translated loosely as the place of long light, and it was 6.3 light years from Earth, which was close enough to feel like a neighbor and far enough to make the journey strange. Ethan made that journey 3 times in the 14 months that followed. The first time was 6 weeks after the incident on the diplomatic vessel, when Sale returned home for a consultation with her father's court and requested that her new guardian accompany her. Ethan packed light. He had always packed light. The things he needed were mostly habits, and he carried those without luggage. Vel Sara looked from orbit like an eye. There was a circular sea at its equator that was almost perfectly round, surrounded by land masses that curved away from it in long arcs. And when the ship came in over the day side, you could see the light catching the surface of that sea from thousands of miles up, a single bright point at the center of everything. Sale stood beside him at the observation port when the planet came into view. Her bioluminescent lines had been very active all morning. She had not been home in 8 months, and whatever that felt like for a Velthari, it was visible on her face. What do you think? She asked. It's beautiful, he said, and meant it. She looked at him as if checking whether the word was genuine. Then the lines along her jaw brightened slightly. The sea is called the Vel, she said. It is why the planet has its name. When our people were still young, before ships, before translation, before any of this, our oldest stories say that the Vel was where the world began, where light first touched water and the water remembered. That's a good story, Ethan said. You have a similar one, she said. Several, actually. I have been reading your mythologies. He looked at her. You've been reading human mythology. You are going to be living in my father's court, she said, with a precision that carried no judgment, only fact. I thought it would be useful to understand where you come from. He looked back at the planet, the eye of it the bright center. What did you learn? He asked. She was quiet for a moment, and he had the sense she was choosing carefully. That you have always made stories about people who protect things, she said. Not just warriors, guardians, people who stand between harm and what matters. In almost every culture, at almost every point in your history, you made those stories. You told them to your children. She paused. I think that is why you are the way you are. He thought about that. We also make a lot of stories about people who destroy things, he said honestly. Yes, she said, but the two are not separate, are they? The same capacity, pointed in different directions. He looked at her. The planet's light caught the edge of her face, and her bioluminescent lines pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm that he had come to recognize as calm. You've been thinking about this, he said. Since the first night, she said, since I asked you that question. He remembered. The corridor, the bullets, the strange amber light waiting behind them. Most people don't ask questions like that in the middle of a firefight, he said. I needed to know, she said simply. I needed to understand what kind of answer you were going to give. And now you understand it. She looked back at the planet, her homeworld, the place of long light with its ancient sea at the center and its landmasses curving away like arms. I am beginning to, she said. The ship descended through the upper atmosphere, and the light changed from the thin, cold blue of space to something warmer, deeper, amber gold, the same color the cognition system had used in the inner corridors, and Ethan understood suddenly that it was not a coincidence. The ship had been showing him something, a color that meant safety, home. The court of the High Sovereign was not what Ethan expected. He had been briefed on Velthari formal culture, had read the documents about hierarchy and ceremony, and the specific protocols for humans entering the sovereign's presence for the first time. He had prepared himself for something vast and cold and ancient. Instead, he found a building that felt lived in. It was large, certainly. The central hall had ceilings so high that the top disappeared into soft amber light. The walls were the same composite material as the ship, with the same responsive quality, pulsing faintly in patterns that changed as people moved through them. There were Velthari everywhere, in robes and armor and clothing he did not have words for, and they all paused when Ethan walked through the door. Not with hostility, with curiosity. Sale had walked in ahead of him, and her father had met her in the center of the hall, and the reunion had been quiet and particular in the way that reunions between people who do not display feeling loudly, but feel it deeply always are. The High Sovereign was tall, older than his daughter by something Ethan could not estimate, with bioluminescent markings that covered far more of his face and neck than Sale's. He had looked at Ethan over his daughter's shoulder with eyes that were a deeper violet, closer to black at the center. Then he had walked forward, and without ceremony, without preamble, without any of the protocol the briefings had prepared Ethan for, he had looked at him at close range and said one sentence. The translator rendered it as, "She says you moved toward the problem." "Yes," Ethan said. The sovereign looked at him for a long moment. "Good," he said. He turned and walked back toward the far end of the hall, and the court resumed its motion around him, and Sale appeared at Ethan's shoulder with an expression he could not quite read. "Did that go well?" Ethan asked quietly. "That was the highest possible approval," she said. He looked at the sovereigns retreating back, the tall, unhurried walk of someone who had made very many decisions and had learned to hold each one lightly. "Huh," Ethan said. The months that followed were unlike anything in his experience, and his experience was considerable. He learned the court. He learned the rhythms of Velthari formal life, the meaning of the light changes in the walls, the difference between a gathering that was ceremonial and one that was working, the names and standings of the people around Sale, and which of them were genuinely close to her and which were close to her position rather than to her. He learned to read the bioluminescent markings, not fluently, not the way a Velthari would, but well enough to understand when a room was comfortable and when it was not. He ran patrols that looked nothing like any patrol he had ever run. He checked sight lines in buildings that curved and grew and occasionally rearranged themselves. He filed security assessments with Colonel Holt on a weekly basis, and those assessments became, over time, some of the most read documents in the Joint Commission's archive, because he wrote them the way he thought, in plain language without jargon, full of the specific details that came from paying very close attention. The Vethsorn were still out there, he never forgot that. They made 2 more attempts in those 14 months. The first was an infiltration of the court's communication system, caught by Ethan's work with the ship's cognition tech he had been learning since the incident. The Velthari engineers had, with remarkable openness, started teaching him how their systems worked after the fold, apparently on the grounds that someone who had thought to ask about it deserved to understand it. The second attempt was a physical approach, a team of 6 moving through an outer district of the city in the direction of the court, and that one Ethan caught early enough that the response team handled it before it came anywhere near Sale. After the second intercept, Sale had found him in the courtyard where he went to run in the mornings, the one place in the court that had something close to the open air he missed. "They will not stop," she said. "No," he agreed. "Because you are here." "Partly," he said, "mostly because they believe in what they're doing. People who believe in things are hard to stop." She looked at him. "You believe in things?" "Yes." "Does that make you hard to stop?" He thought about it. "Ask me when someone tries." Her bioluminescent lines pulsed in a pattern he had come to recognize as something between amusement and exasperation. "You are," she said, "a very frustrating person to have a serious conversation with." "My mother says the same thing," he said. She had never heard him mention his family before. He could see the curiosity shift through her expression. "Tell me about her," she said. He started running again and she walked beside him, and he told her about Riverside, about the lemon tree with its unreliable harvest, about a woman who had raised 3 children mostly alone, and had done it with a precision and firmness that he had only fully appreciated in retrospect. The courtyard moved past them. The amber light of Vel Sora filtered through the high opening in the ceiling. The world was very far from home and felt, somehow, not entirely unlike it. The crisis came on a Tuesday. It was always a Tuesday, Ethan had noticed, or something very like a Tuesday. The kind of day that was supposed to be ordinary, that had nothing on the schedule except routine, that lulled people into the particular inattention of the expected. He had been awake since before the Vel Sorin equivalent of dawn, running his morning check of the court's perimeter systems, when the alert came through from the Joint Commission's monitoring relay. Not a Veth-Sorn approach, not an infiltration attempt, something different, something the Commission had flagged as a category they did not yet have a name for. A Velthari vessel had been intercepted near the transit point between systems, not a diplomatic ship, not military. A small, fast courier type, registered to a trading house that, when the Commission ran it back, did not exist. 3 Veth-Sorn aboard, and a message broadcast on a frequency that every ship in range would pick up, that the translators took 15 minutes to fully render. The message said, "The princess dies today or the treaty dies with her." Ethan read it once, then he set it down, finished his coffee, and went to find Sale. She was already awake. She was standing in the high-ceilinged room she used for meetings, her hands still, her bioluminescent lines very quiet and very bright, the kind of stillness that came before a decision. Her senior advisor was there, an older female named Laris who had been managing Sale's schedule and communications for 6 years, and who had, over 14 months, progressed from regarding Ethan with careful neutrality to something warmer, and 2 members of the court security force. They all looked at him when he came in. "You've seen it," Sale said. "Yes," he said. "What does it mean?" "It means they're done with quiet approaches," he said. "The courier and the message are a distraction, something to pull attention outward while the real attempt comes from somewhere already inside the perimeter." The room was very still. "You think they have someone here?" Laris said. "I think we should assume it," Ethan said. He spent the next 3 hours going back through 14 months of his own security assessments, every access log, every visitor record, every supply delivery, every systems check. It was not glamorous work. It was the kind of work that only produced results if you had been doing it carefully from the beginning, and Ethan had been doing it carefully from the beginning because that was the only way he knew how to work. He found it in the 7th access log from 2 weeks prior. A maintenance cycle for the court's atmospheric regulation system that had been logged correctly, authorized correctly, carried out by a team with proper credentials. But that had run 40 minutes longer than any previous maintenance cycle of the same type, with no notation in the record explaining the extra time. He pulled the atmospheric systems logs. The extra 40 minutes had been spent in a section of the building that had no atmospheric regulation components. He ran the floor plan against the section and found what it was adjacent to. Sale's private residence. He did not run. Running created alarm before you were ready for alarm to exist. He walked, at a pace that communicated purpose without urgency, to Laris and spoke to her quietly. And 4 minutes later the court's security team had a very specific task and a very short window to complete it in. They found the device 40 minutes before the Veth Sorn planned to use it. It was not a weapon, exactly. A technology for which the Commission would spend months finding a proper classification. Something that interacted with Velthari biology in a way that was deeply harmful and deeply specific, and had been designed by someone who understood Velthari physiology at a level that implied either a traitor or a very old intelligence file, or both. The 3 people involved were apprehended within the hour. The Veth Sorn courier near the transit point, deprived of the signal it had been waiting for, turned back toward the outer system and was intercepted by a Velthari patrol vessel. By late afternoon, it was over. Ethan sat in the courtyard alone for a while, in the amber light, with the high opening overhead showing a strip of Vel Soren sky. He was very tired. He had not been afraid during any of it, or rather, he had been afraid in the way he was always afraid, the way that turned itself into attention and motion rather than stopping him. But he felt it now, the way you always felt it afterward, when there was nothing left to move toward and the body finally made its accounting. Sale found him there. She sat down beside him, which was not something she did often in formal settings, and for a while they did not speak. "Laris says," Sale finally said, "that you found it in the logs." "Yes." "She says no one else would have seen it." "Someone else would have eventually," he said. "But not in time," she said. He did not answer that. "Ethan Cole," she said, and there was something formal in the way she used both names, the way she had that first night in the corridor. "I want to ask you something." He looked at her, the violet eyes steady, the bioluminescent lines in their slow, even pulse. "Ask," he said. "When I asked if you could protect me," she said, "that first night I asked it the Velthari way. I expected an assessment, a calculation. A professional response." She paused. "You said yes, and I had no idea what that meant." "I know," he said. "I do now," she said quietly. He looked at the strip of sky above them. The light was shifting toward the longer wavelengths that marked the end of Vel Sora's day, something between gold and rose, the same palette that his grandmother had described when she talked about California sunsets, the light she had grown up in and never stopped missing when she moved inland. "It means I'm difficult to stop," he said, "when something matters." "Yes," she said, "that is exactly what it means." The silence between them settled, and it had the quality that the best silences have, the quality of being understood. Not everything, not all at once, but the important thing. The thing that had started in a corridor with bullets in the walls, and a question asked without any expectation of the answer it would receive. He had said yes. He had moved toward the problem. He had kept moving for 14 months, through all the problems that came after, the infiltrations and the attempts, and the long quiet work of learning a world that was not his, and a person who was not like anyone he had met, and the gradual, unannounced way that work had stopped feeling like duty and started feeling like something else entirely, something he did not yet have the right word for, in English or in Velthari. My father, Sale said, wants to formalize the guardian designation. Ethan looked at her. In Velthari law, she said, it means something permanent. It is not an assignment, it is not a contract with a term. It is a standing, a place in the court, in the record, in the history. She paused. He asked me to ask you because he said that the answer should come from you, not from a chain of command, not from a commission, from you. The last light of Velsara moved across the courtyard. The walls of the court pulsed slowly around them, warm and amber and patient as the ship had been on that first night, when the light had followed Sale's fingers like something alive. He thought about Colonel Holt, who had handed him a sheet of paper with a single word on it. He thought about the Pacific below 17,000 feet of nothing, and Riverside and a lemon tree, and his mother's voice telling him, when he was 7 years old and he had said he was scared of something, that being scared was fine. Being scared was information. The only question was what you did with it. He thought about a corridor, and 11 seconds, and the look on Sale's face afterward. He thought about what it meant to move toward the problem. Tell your father, Ethan said, yes. The bioluminescent lines along Sale's jaw blazed suddenly, brilliantly bright, like something lit from the inside, like the sun on the ancient sea at the center of her world. He expected that, she said. Did you? Ethan asked. She looked at him, her eyes caught the dying light. Something in them was warm and certain and completely unguarded, the expression of someone who has been surprised by something good and is no longer pretending otherwise. Yes, she said, from the very beginning. And the amber light held them both, and the world turned on its axis in its particular way, and somewhere in the depth of the court, the ship's cognition system, the one that had helped them fold 3 enemies into an empty bay, the one that had sealed doors and pulsed gentle warnings and followed a princess's fingers like a curious animal, made a sound that was almost, but not quite, the sound of something satisfied. The long light of Velsora went to dark, and the guardian stayed.